The Young and the Restless spoilers Saturday's full August 23, 2025. The tension in Genoa City was palpable, with secrets lingering like a storm waiting to break. For Nate Hastings, the weight of his decision was becoming unbearable. The deep doubts that had begun to fester about Audra's loyalty were threatening to consume him, and the conversations that had followed, first with Claire, then with his own conscience, had only muddied the waters further. When Devon Winters, his closest friend and the man whose judgment he had always trusted, offered to help him untangle his emotions, Nate couldn't refuse. Devon, who had seen enough of the world to know when things didn't add up, offered a steady hand through the storm, and Nate, weary from the turmoil, reluctantly agreed to sit down with him and talk things through. "Devon, I've been cleaning up my thoughts all day," Nate said, his voice heavy as he sank into the chair beside his friend. The weight of the past few days had taken its toll on him, and now, with Devon's reassurance, he could finally unload. Devon, ever the patient listener, raised an eyebrow. "You've been cleaning up your thoughts, huh? Sounds like you've got a lot to sort out." His calm demeanor was the perfect balance to Nate's internal chaos. "It's Audra," Nate began, the name feeling like a weight he couldn't shake off. "Everyone warned me. I thought I could trust her, but now I'm not so sure." His words were laced with the pain of betrayal, not just from Audra's actions but from his own naivety. Devon leaned forward, his brow furrowing slightly. "You're telling me what I've already heard, that Audra might not be as trustworthy as you thought. But it's more than that, isn't it? What's really eating at you, Nate?" Nate exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Claire said Audra made a deal with Victor to seduce Kyle. She claims that Audra's the one who made the first move, but Audra's insisting Kyle was the one to come onto her." He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air before continuing. "And then there's this whole mess with Nice. Claire saw Kyle and Audra kiss, right in front of her. I can't ignore it anymore." Devon's eyes narrowed, clearly processing the gravity of what Nate had just revealed. "That's a lot of smoke, Nate. You can't ignore all these sparks and expect the fire to stay contained." His tone was calm, but there was a bite to it, the kind that came with knowing that a storm was inevitable. "Do you trust Audra or Claire?" Devon asked, his voice direct, cutting through the noise that had been clouding Nate's judgment. "I want to trust Audra," Nate replied, his voice almost pleading, as if he could still believe in her despite everything. "But Claire has no reason to lie, and what she saw, what she knows, it doesn't add up." He rubbed his temples, trying to sift through the confusion. "Nice seems to be the heart of all this. Every mess leads back there." Devon nodded slowly. "Right. And if Claire saw Kyle and Audra kiss, then you've got to wonder what was going on before that. The whole situation in Nice seems like a powder keg ready to blow." "I get why you're confused, Nate." There was a long pause before Devon spoke again, softer now. "But if you don't trust Audra, then you have to ask yourself why you're still standing by her." Nate stared down at the floor, wrestling with his emotions. "I don't know. A part of me wants to believe her, wants to think she's different. But another part of me is terrified of what that might mean if I'm wrong." His voice was thick with regret, a man torn between love and truth, between loyalty and betrayal. Devon sighed, offering his friend a reassuring smile. "Look, I understand how tangled this is. But if it were me, I'd trust Claire's instincts over Audra's promises. If she was telling the truth about what happened in Nice, then you've got a bigger problem than just this one kiss. You've got a woman who can't be trusted, a woman who might be playing you just like she played Victor, Kyle, and everyone else." Nate nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "What if I'm wrong, Devon? What if I'm overreacting? What if Audra is telling the truth? I don't know if I can live with that doubt hanging over me." Devon's voice was firm now, his words cutting through the haze of Nate's confusion. "Listen to your gut, Nate. You know it's telling you something you're not ready to hear. And believe me, when it comes to Audra, trust is the last thing you can afford to give." Meanwhile, across town, Audra was grappling with her own struggles, but in a very different way. She had always been a woman who played the game with precision, her every move calculated to achieve power, control, and success. But now, she was cornered. Nate's questioning had left her rattled, and though she had tried to deflect, she could feel the walls closing in around her. Her thoughts turned to Sally Spectra, the only person she trusted to understand her predicament. Audra needed someone to confide in, someone who could give her the perspective she so desperately needed. Sally, with her own complicated history and understanding of what it was like to be underestimated, was the perfect sounding board. "I'm trying to protect Nate," Audra confessed, her voice tinged with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I know it looks bad. I know people think I'm playing games, but all I want is to protect what we have. I want to be with him, Sally. I want him to believe in me, to trust me again." Sally studied her carefully, understanding the pain behind Audra's words. "You've got to understand, Audra, you can't keep running from the consequences of your actions. If Nate starts asking the right questions, you won't be able to hide forever." Audra's eyes narrowed as she responded, a steely resolve creeping into her tone. "I'm not going down without a fight. I've come too far to let anyone take this from me, not Victor, not Kyle, and certainly not Claire. If I have to burn the whole city to the ground, I will. But Nate, he's mine. And I won't let him slip away." Far from the heated exchange, Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins were having a conversation of their own, one that would soon ripple out and affect their son, Kyle. They had been keeping their eyes on the chaos brewing between Kyle, Audra, and Nate, and both had come to a firm conclusion. Kyle, for all his bravado, was headed straight for a dangerous collision with Audra's schemes, and they had to warn him before it was too late. "You need to speak to Kyle," Diane said, her voice filled with quiet concern. "He's caught up in something that could destroy him. He needs to know what's really going on." Jack nodded gravely, his expression mirroring the weight of the warning. "I agree. We've seen this pattern before, Diane. If he doesn't listen, he could end up losing everything, his career, his relationships, even his self-respect. It's time we stepped in." This continuation delves deeper into the emotional struggles and decisions of Nate, Audra, and Devon, the warnings from Jack and Diane, and the building tension as Nate inches closer to making his final decision. If you'd like to continue expanding further or focus on a specific aspect of the story, feel free to let me know. At Crimson Lights, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the buzz of afternoon conversations. It was the kind of place where secrets often found their way into hushed tones, where discussions of business and betrayal merged effortlessly over cups of cappuccino and lattes. Audra, ever the professional yet always the schemer, had agreed to meet Sally Spectra for a seemingly innocent chat about the upcoming launch. What could go wrong, right? But as soon as Audra sat across from Sally, the air between them thickened with the weight of unsaid words. Sally, keenly aware of the tension, took a sip of her coffee but couldn't ignore the underlying discomfort she felt. Audra was hiding something, and her posture, a little too rigid, her gaze a little too intense, spoke volumes. Sally had been through enough in this town to recognize the signs of someone trying to keep it all together while their world unraveled behind closed doors. "So, about the launch," Sally began, attempting to steer the conversation back to business. But Audra's response was swift, sharp, and veered into much darker territory. "That which Claire dropped a bomb on Nate," Audra muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing as the name left her lips. "She told him everything about my deal with Victor." Her voice was laced with venom, frustration clearly simmering beneath her controlled exterior. "I should have seen this coming." Sally's brow furrowed as she leaned forward slightly, intrigued but also cautious. She had heard enough about the drama surrounding Claire, Kyle, and the tangled mess of relationships to know that the situation was getting worse by the minute. "What did she say?" Sally asked, her voice low, her instincts telling her that this was more than just a simple gossip session. Audra's frustration bubbled to the surface as she continued. "The girl has no boundaries. She went right for Nate the moment he was alone at the bar. Told him everything, about my deal with Victor, everything. Audra's face tightened, her fists clenching slightly at her sides. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it. And the worst part? She's walking around like she's some kind of saint, proud of herself for ruining everything. Sally was silent for a moment, processing what Audra had just revealed. She knew Claire had her share of issues, but this felt like something deeper, more calculated. Audra's words were starting to paint a picture of Claire as a much bigger threat than Sally had initially realized. That crazy girl isn't as pathetic as I thought, Audra continued bitterly. She laid it all out, and she's proud of it. But what she doesn't realize is that her boyfriend, Nate, was just one towel away from taking it all the way. Audra's voice was dripping with disdain, her eyes flashing with both anger and something else, resentment, maybe jealousy, or perhaps just fear. Claire has no idea that Nate was about to cross the line, but she's too wrapped up in her own drama to see it. Sally took another sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving Audra. It was clear that this was far from just a business meeting. What does Nate think about all this? She asked, her voice steady, though she knew deep down that Audra wasn't just venting. She needed something. Validation, maybe. A listening ear. Audra let out a sharp breath, her frustration spilling over once again. Nate slept on the couch. The words were bitter as they left her mouth, the sting of defeat evident in her tone. I might have mentioned Victor to him, but that didn't go over well either. I'm just trying to protect him, Sally. That's all I've ever done. But now, Audra trailed off, her gaze flicking to the side, as though the weight of the situation was finally hitting her. Sally, ever the realist, leaned in slightly. Maybe lying isn't the best way to protect him, she offered gently, almost as if speaking from experience. Her voice softened with a hint of understanding. I've been in your shoes, Audra. I tried to protect Adam by hiding the truth, and look where that got me. She paused, her words carrying the weight of personal history. In the end, lies only make things worse. You've got to face the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Audra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew Sally was right. The lies, the manipulation, the hiding behind layers of deceit, Audra had lived it long enough to understand that it was a temporary fix. Sooner or later, everything came out into the open. But she wasn't ready to admit that to herself yet. Before Audra could respond, a voice broke the tense silence. Nate, looking as disheveled and exhausted as ever, appeared at the door. His eyes immediately locked with Audra's, and without saying a word, he moved toward their table. Sally, ever the observer, silently rose from her seat. She knew this wasn't the moment for her to be involved in the drama. With a polite nod, she excused herself, her departure leaving Audra and Nate alone to face the consequences of their tangled web. We should enjoy today, forget everything else, Audra said, trying to salvage something, to find any way to repair the crumbling conversation. Her words were hopeful, a desperate attempt to smooth over the tension. But Nate, his gaze hardening, shook his head. Your story doesn't make sense anymore, Audra. There are too many holes in it. His voice was cold, and the disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than anything he could say. You're lying to me. The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, Audra's mask cracked. She had tried so hard to keep control, but Nate's unwavering conviction was too much to ignore. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was losing, not just a battle, but her grip on everything. Meanwhile, at the Newman ranch, Nikki Newman noticed something was off. Victor, usually so composed, was visibly distracted, his brow furrowed in thought. She had spent enough years by his side to know when something weighed heavily on him. What's on your mind, Victor? She asked softly, her voice gentle yet firm as she approached him. Victor's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, it was as if he was seeing through her, his mind elsewhere. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, the tension in it palpable. It's Claire and Kyle. Nikki raised an eyebrow, though she already suspected where this conversation was headed. What's the issue with them? Victor sighed deeply, his jaw tightening. It's time to settle this, once and for all. His words were filled with a dangerous finality, the kind of resolve that only Victor Newman could muster. He wasn't one to let things drag on forever. Whatever he was planning, it was clear that the game had reached its conclusion. With that, he turned and left, his figure retreating into the shadows of his empire. The silence in the room was deafening, and Nikki's heart skipped a beat. She knew Victor well enough to understand that when he said it was time to settle something, it meant there was no going back. This segment continues to weave Nate and Audra's growing tension, Sally's warning, and Victor's dangerous resolve, with hints of further betrayal and shifting allegiances. It is clear that the stage is set for more dramatic confrontations and decisions that will shape the future of these characters. At the Newman Ranch, the mood was heavy, the air thick with unsaid words. Claire sat in the sitting room with Victoria Newman, their conversation about Audra still hanging between them like an unresolved chord. The younger woman had just finished telling Victoria about her confrontation with Nate, her revelation about Audra's scheming, and how everything seemed to be unraveling. Victoria leaned in, her gaze intense as she asked, "How did Nate react?" Her question carried the weight of genuine concern, her eyes searching Claire's face for signs of what had happened after she dropped the bombshell about Audra. Claire sighed, her expression weary but determined. "He was in shock," she said quietly. "But I hope now he understands the truth. I couldn't let Audra walk away from this without consequences." There was a sharp edge to her voice, as if she had been carrying this burden for too long. "She tried to blame it all on Kyle, but I didn't let her get away with it. She's not going to lie her way out of this." Victoria nodded, absorbing the weight of Claire's words, her mind racing. "Do you think Nate believes you?" she asked, her voice cautious, sensing the uncertainty that lingered in Claire's tone. Claire hesitated, her eyes flickering for a moment before answering. "I'm not sure. Part of me hopes he does, but part of me thinks he's still conflicted." She looked away, as if the doubt in Nate's eyes was still fresh. "I don't think he's fully come to terms with what Audra is capable of. Not yet." Just as the conversation seemed to be nearing its end, the sound of a knock on the door interrupted the moment. Claire turned in surprise as Victor entered the room, his presence commanding the space with the kind of authority only he could wield. His eyes met Claire's, and for a brief moment, there was an understanding between them, one of shared history and complex ties. "Claire," Victor began, his voice deep and measured, "I've come to speak with you privately." Claire's surprise was evident as she rose to meet him. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone cautious, unsure of what Victor's next move would be. Victor's gaze softened for a moment, a rare vulnerability creeping into his expression as he stepped closer to Claire. "I've been thinking about what's happened, and I've come to a decision," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "I will no longer stand between you and Kyle." Claire blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. "What?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "Why are you changing your mind now?" Victor took a breath, as though the weight of his confession was something he had been carrying for a long time. "You and I, Claire, we share something that no one else understands. We both grew up without parents, without love or care. We were abandoned in ways that shaped who we are today." His eyes softened, a rare glimpse of his own painful past breaking through the steel walls he had built around himself. "I wanted to protect you, to shield you from the same pain I've experienced. But after everything that's happened, I see now that I've been wrong." Claire's eyes softened as she reached out, her voice trembling slightly. "Victor, I love you. I don't want you to feel like you have to protect me anymore." She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him in a warm embrace. "Please, forgive me for everything that's happened." Victor's response was simple but profound, "Please forgive me, Claire." The words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of years of regret, of a man who had never truly let go of his protective instincts, even when they had pushed his loved ones away. As they pulled apart, Victor's expression hardened once again, his focus shifting. I'll always be here for you, Claire. But now, it's time for you to make your own decisions. Be careful with Kyle. He's your choice, but remember, I'll be watching. With those final words, Victor turned and left, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Back at Society, Kyle was having a very different conversation. Diane and Jack sat across from him, both of them looking at him with concern. Kyle had just finished telling them about the latest twist in the drama, how Audra had kissed him in front of Claire, further complicating an already chaotic situation. Jack's expression was grim as he listened. So, Audra kissed you right in front of Claire? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. How did she handle that? Kyle shook his head. She stood by me, but I could tell she was questioning things. She was hurt, but she still wanted to believe in me. But honestly, it was more than just the kiss. It wasn't the first one. It happened in Nice. Diane's eyes widened slightly at the revelation. What happened in Nice, Kyle? She asked, her tone serious, the implications of his words starting to sink in. Kyle leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. I did it to lure Audra in, to see if she would fall for it. I wanted to know if she would bite. But it wasn't just a game. I wasn't expecting to be in this mess. His voice was thick with regret. And I haven't told Claire yet. Jack was quick to react, his tone sharp. Kyle, this is the kind of thing that will backfire on you. This is the kind of lie that will hurt you in ways you can't predict. I know, Kyle muttered, looking down at the table, feeling the weight of his actions pressing down on him. But if I tell Claire now, I'll look guilty. And if I don't, it'll eat me alive. There's no right way to do this. Diane leaned in, her voice softer now. You need to be honest, Kyle. This kind of deception will come back to haunt you. You have to decide if you want to protect Claire or protect yourself. Right now, I'm just trying to protect her, Kyle replied, his voice strained. But I can't keep running from the truth. Before the conversation could go further, Kyle's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was Victor. With a sigh, he answered Victor. Get to the ranch, Victor's voice came through, calm but commanding. I need to speak with you. It's time we settle this once and for all. Kyle nodded, his heart racing. He knew this conversation was going to change everything. At the Newman Ranch, Victor stood waiting, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. When Kyle arrived, Victor wasted no time getting to the point. I've tested you, Kyle, he began, his voice steady but filled with authority. And you've proven yourself. You've convinced me that you truly care for my granddaughter. So, I will step aside. I will no longer stand in your way. Kyle was stunned, unsure of how to react. Victor, I'm grateful. I swear, I will never hurt Claire. Victor looked at him, his expression unwavering. I hope you don't. But don't mistake my stepping aside for weakness. I will be watching you, Kyle. Make sure you keep your promises. Kyle nodded, feeling the weight of Victor's warning. He knew that whatever happened next, he had to live up to the trust that had just been given to him. The stakes were higher than ever, and the path forward was anything but clear. This segment expands the plot by adding Victor's shift in stance toward Kyle, Claire's emotional conversation with Victor, and Kyle's inner conflict as he grapples with the fallout of his actions. It sets up significant decisions ahead for the characters. If you'd like to expand further on Kyle and Claire's eventual confrontation or dive deeper into Victor's manipulations and his continued involvement in the drama, just let me know. As the days dragged on, the tension between Nate and Audra reached its breaking point. He could no longer ignore the deepening mistrust, nor could he withstand the constant lies she wove around him. Every time he thought he was getting closer to understanding her, she slipped further away, her true motives hiding just beneath the surface. Nate's patience had run out, and with every passing moment, the chasm between them widened. He had tried to believe in her. He had tried to convince himself that Audra's ambition, her cunning, and her secrecy were just part of her nature, a nature he had misunderstood, perhaps even accepted as part of the package deal. But it was no longer just her ambition that bothered him. It was the deception. The constant lies, the half-truths, the manipulation. Everything he had learned about her, everything Claire had revealed about Audra's dealings with Victor, now felt like a crushing weight on his conscience. Nate had given Audra a chance to explain herself, but every time he asked, every time he sought clarity, all he received were more layers of confusion. Her excuses seemed rehearsed, her explanations inconsistent. In the end, the reality was undeniable. Audra had lied to him. Not just once, but again, and he could no longer turn a blind eye to it. "I can't do this anymore, Audra," Nate finally said, his voice cold, betraying none of the warmth he had once shown her. "I'm done with the lies." Audra, who had been bracing herself for this moment, stiffened but quickly tried to salvage the situation. Her usual poise faltered for only a split second, but she quickly masked it with a practiced expression. She knew this confrontation was coming, but it still hit her like a slap. She had worked so hard to manipulate Nate, to control the narrative, but now, everything was falling apart. The truth had finally forced its way to the surface, and it was too late to backpedal. "Nate, I'm sorry," Audra said, her voice quivering slightly. She even tried to soften her gaze, to appear vulnerable, an act she had mastered over the years, one she often used to disarm those who stood in her way. But this time, it felt hollow. The tears she tried to summon were forced, and Nate could see through the act. Nate crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "You're sorry," he repeated incredulously. "I can't even trust what's coming out of your mouth anymore, Audra. The truth is, you're sorry only because you got caught." His eyes flashed with anger, but it was the hurt in his voice that cut deeper. "You played me, and I let you. I let you play me like a fool." Audra took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no choice now but to face the reality of her situation. The truth would come out, whether she liked it or not. There was no escaping it. She could see the resolve in Nate's eyes. The walls were closing in, and she could either keep fighting or admit everything. "Fine, Nate. You want the truth?" Audra spat, her voice hardening. Claire was right. Victor hired me to drive a wedge between her and Kyle. The words hung in the air like a confession of the highest order, the kind of revelation that would shatter more than just their relationship. "I kissed Kyle, hoping it would cause a stir, hoping I could tear them apart." She paused, her gaze hardening, but there was no denying the shame that flickered across her features for just a second. "I thought it would be the key to everything: money, power, status. I thought if I could ruin their relationship, I'd have leverage." Nate's eyes widened at the admission. Every word she spoke only confirmed his worst fears. She had played him, just like Victor had played her, and now he was nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. He felt sick to his stomach. But the worst part? Audra wasn't sorry. She wasn't apologizing for the destruction she had caused. She wasn't begging for forgiveness because she had harmed anyone. She wasn't even regretting her actions. Instead, Audra seemed frustrated that Nate was questioning her at all. She had taken a gamble, and now she was mad that the consequences were finally catching up to her. "You think I'm sorry?" Audra sneered, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry I got caught." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "I would have done it all again if it meant I could get what I wanted." Nate's eyes darkened with anger, the hurt he had felt earlier now fully boiling over. "You don't get it, do you?" he growled. "You're the one who ruined this. You're the one who destroyed everything, not just for me, but for you too. I thought I could trust you, Audra. But you never even cared about me. You only cared about getting ahead, and I was just a stepping stone." Audra's face fell as Nate's words struck her like a physical blow. She had hoped that some part of him would still be salvageable, that maybe he would forgive her, that he would see her as the victim, but this was different. This was Nate, the man she had manipulated, and now he saw her for exactly what she was, a liar, a schemer, and a woman who was willing to destroy anyone for her own gain. Nate shook his head in disgust. "You've lost everything, Audra." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the aftermath of her own choices. As he reached the door, his voice cut through the silence, bitter and final. "I'm done. And don't come back." Back at Victor's ranch, the drama wasn't over. With everything else unfolding around him, Victor was still grappling with his own decisions, most notably regarding his granddaughter, Claire. His mind was occupied, filled with thoughts of how Claire and Kyle's relationship had spiraled. After hearing about the confrontation and the lies that had been spun, Victor had made up his mind. It was time for a final reckoning. Claire, sitting quietly in the room, looked up as Victor entered. His presence alone filled the space with a palpable weight. "Claire," Victor began, his voice heavy with the intensity of what he was about to say. "I've made my decision. I won't stand between you and Kyle anymore." Claire's eyes widened in shock. "What's changed? Why the sudden change of heart?" she asked, genuinely puzzled by Victor's shift. Victor's eyes softened slightly, and his voice grew quieter, almost vulnerable. "You and I have something in common. We both grew up without parents, without love, without care. We know what that feels like. I've tried to protect you, Claire. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now, I see it's time for you to make your own decisions." Claire's eyes misted over with emotion. She stood and walked toward him, hugging him tightly. "I love you, Uncle Victor." Victor whispered, "Please forgive me." And for the first time in a long while, there was something resembling peace in his heart. This segment dives deeper into Nate's breaking point with Audra, her confession of her manipulations, and Victor's emotional shift with Claire, revealing a key turning point for the characters. Let me know if you'd like to expand on the fallout from Audra's manipulation, or if you'd prefer to focus more on Victor's next move with Kyle and Claire.